Hello, welcome back to the second on our videos on dagger dueling in the Bolognese tradition. I'm actually going to move us a little bit closer to the camera so you can see what's going on. You don't really need to be able to see our feet this week. What we're going to be talking about is the first principle that Marozzo gives us when it comes to dagger dueling, and that is very simple: keep your hand moving. Now the reason for that is, if Andrew has his dagger out threatening at me here and just holds it there, that hit over the top or that hit into the side is very tempting. There's any number of ways I can end this fight quite quickly if I can reach his hand. So the first thing I've got to do is keep this hand moving. And for those of you who've studied anything like a screamer or anything like that, you're going to notice that's a similar principle: don't leave it floating around. Even if you're doing something like side sword, this hand gets tucked out the way. We don't leave it out floating because it becomes a target. So, how does he suggest we do this? Well, first of all, he gives us a sequence of moves that we want to use. And these are, to start with, you want to thrust, and then you want to do squalembrato, followed by a reverso squalembrato, which brings me back to the point where I can thrust again. And this movement keeps my hand constantly moving, so it's a harder target, but also creates an issue for him that he can't just attack into that, because there is actually a wall of moving steel in front of him that if he wants to walk through, he's going to get stabbed or cut. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to keep my hand moving, and if I can't think of anything else cunning to do with it, I'm going to run through this sequence over and over again. Now, then we look at how Marozzo sets up his first kind of little tactic, is that he's going to stab for our opponent's hand. Boom. Yeah? Especially if our opponent's leaving it still. Okay? So that makes sense. But then what we're going to look at is, even if I do have this hand still, I can move my hand fairly quickly. So if Andrew comes in to stab my hand, yeah, I can move my hand out of the way relatively easy. Now, assuming that I'm also maybe going to give ground if I don't, give way and get stabbed in the chest instead. That's a bad transition. But if he comes to stab my hand, I can move it out of the way. I can move it to the side very easily. Boom. I can move it out of the way. So that's the first thing, is being aware that my hand moves relatively easy and I can just slip that out of the way. That also then leads us to the idea that we know he's going to slip it. So if he has his hand out and my first attack comes in to stab and he slips his hand up, yeah, then my next technique here, if we look, what's my next attack from here? Well, in my sequence, I stab, and I cut, and I cut. So I'm actually luring him into that slip so that I can cut him. And I've gone through my basic intro sequence: get in, cut, cut, against his arm. And hopefully that might be enough. I mean, if this is a duel situation, that's probably enough to end this fight. I've opened some blood, that's all good. These are not being fought to the death normally. So that's the first bit we need to be aware of, is that we can move our hand. So the question is then, how do I move my hand and not get stabbed? Well, when the stab comes into my hand, rather than just raising it up, which as you can see exposes all of my forearm, instead, as that thrust comes, I'm going to cut over the top into the arm and move it out to the side. Yeah? Now, that's what we're told. I suspect, much like all of Bolognese stuff, we're going to add some footwork into that rather than just stand there and do it. So that becomes, and I am well clear of that cut, and I have intercepted against my opponent's arm. Equally, I can go the other way as well. Should I decide, I can move that rather than slipping my hand straight up. I'm actually going to strip it up and forward into a cut to the inside or the outside of my opponent's arm, moving away from the blade to keep myself safe. So that's really the first bit that Marozzo gives us. Keep your hand moving, be aware that somebody's going to move their hand, so be prepared to counter it, and also how you actually properly counter it if you know your material. So that's the first bit of Marozzo's dagger. Keep your hand moving. And we'll be back next week to look at the next bit. Okay, until then, take care.